Indy and Helena run out and into the street. When Indy entered the building 5 minutes ago, it was nighttime, but now it is midday. The police show up, and what happens next made me livid. This quick exchange confirmed to me that the writers behind Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny could not be bothered enough to research their titular character. It's a small detail that speaks volumes and infuriates me to no end. I will describe it, then I will unpack it. The Moroccan police arrive, and Helena yells at them in Arabic. Indiana Jones says, "Tell them to back off," requesting her to translate. And then Helena says she told the police to shoot Indy.
Tell them to back off.
I just told him to shoot you.
4 people wrote this script, and not one of them realized that Indiana Jones speaks Arabic. As a lifelong Indiana Jones fan, this is a slap in the face and further evidence that none of the writing staff could do even cursory character research. There is absolutely no reason why Indiana Jones would need to ask someone to translate Arabic for him.
I can't believe this. There's nothing there. Why me?
You speak Arabic?
In somebody special, a trained agent, somebody who speaks both Arabic and Turkish, absolutely trustworthy.
Imshi? ¿Qué es eso? Imshi es una palabra árabe. Quiere decir rápido. ¿Ha estado en Egipto?
There's no way Indiana Jones would not understand or be able to communicate directly in Arabic. Not only does Indiana Jones know Arabic, but the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles establishes that it was the first language he ever learned.
وبالشكل أنا اللغة العربية اللغة القديمة جرى على ترفها.
اللغة العربية هي اللغة تعلمتها عندما ذهبت إلى القاهرة.
Indy not only knew Arabic, but during his adventures in Mexico and his service on the Turkish front of World War I, he was recruited onto special assignments precisely because he knows Arabic. And don't you dare tell me he's forgotten, because he's old. Because later, he fluently speaks ancient Greek. It's little details like this that prove to me that Mangold and his cronies couldn't be bothered to study Jones's linguistic skills, all for the sake of a joke that doesn't land. Don't even get me started on Helena telling police to shoot her grandfather. I haven't the slightest idea how we're supposed to believe Helena is a jerk with a heart of gold when she lies to the police to kill her own grandfather by proxy. I'm not too familiar with the Maghreb dialect of Arabic that's spoken in Morocco, but I doubt this was a joke because it's played completely straight. Honestly, it would have been hilarious if the police opened fire, splattering Helena's face with her godfather's blood, and the movie just ends there. The police back off in fear, and the two are confronted by Gangster Boy. It's explained that Gangster Boy learned that Helena is at his father's hotel, which is strange because why on earth would Helena try to sell the dial at a place owned by someone whose son wants her dead? Is she stupid? Gangster Boy explains that he broke Helena out of prison and was set to marry her, but she broke off the engagement and pawned off the ring. Helena remarks that the ring sold for less than she hoped, solidifying her as a shallow, cheap, disloyal, and materialistic person. Helena and Indy run away. Well, Helena runs. Indy hobbles. The gangsters have terrible aim and miss them as they dash through a covered bazaar. Indy says how terrible Helena is, having a psychopathic mobster as an ex-fiancé. Helena retorts by calling Indy an aging grave robber who only did it for the buzz. Firstly, an aging grave robber. This, mind you, is in the script after they supposedly removed all the jokes ridiculing Harrison's old age. Roll the clip.
And I resonated with and I really didn't want to call him I didn't want her to have to call him an old guy or use any of those kinds of insults with him. And
I like the hat, by the way. Makes you look at least 2 years younger.
Nice.
I don't need morality lessons from an aging grave robber.
Did you know the Wright brothers? Oh, I thought maybe you went to school with them.
Oh, come on, Indy. That was funny.
She doesn't see people in that way.
Secondly, this is another instance of having the writer's preferred character dress down the original hero, calling him a grave robber. Thirdly, at no point in any of the movies does Indy do anything for the buzz. He is not a daredevil with a death wish who actively chases danger. In fact, he usually attempts to avoid violence. He may do it for fortune and glory, but Indy's adventures are never pure good fun for him. He even stuck to an adventure and dedicated himself to free dozens, if not hundreds, of child slaves in India. If anything, Helena is projecting here. She seems addicted to the danger, is extremely reckless, and is far more of a grave robber than Indy. She's a black market peddler. Teddy shows up with a tuk-tuk, and now begins the chase sequence so prominently featured in the trailers. This was the big selling point, and the writers and producers and marketers somehow figured this was decent enough to portray as the main entree. Before I commence with this blow-by-blow, I want to make a point that the tuk-tuk chase is fundamentally flawed. By this, I mean you can clearly tell that this chase was designed with only the spectacle of a tuk-tuk in mind, with no thought towards how it would be related to the setting or the plot. The writers thought, oh, a chase with a tuk-tuk sounds exciting, and they crammed it in regardless of context. Please allow me to explain. A tuk-tuk chase in Tangier makes no sense because tuk-tuks are not at all associated with Morocco. A tuk-tuk, for those who don't know, is also known as an auto rickshaw, and it is effectively a cross between a taxi and a golf cart. Tuk-tuks are heavily associated with South and Southeast Asia, specifically places like India and Thailand with heavy motorcycle traffic. Tuk-tuks are not associated with Tangier or Morocco. That would be like having a gondola in Denver. Why does it matter that the tuk-tuk doesn't belong in Morocco? Because this is a holdover from a scrap sequence in an earlier draft. You see, the Morocco scenes were originally supposed to take place in India. Location manager Duncan Broadfoot traveled to the cities of Jaisalmer and Jaipur, places where one would expect to find a tuk-tuk. However, an outbreak of the disease we can't talk about occurred in India, so an alternate location was sought. Kathmandu, Nepal, was also considered, but a similar wave of illness occurred. So the production team followed the old Hollywood rule that all exotic Oriental destinations are interchangeable, and settled on Morocco. This explains how a tuk-tuk, a vehicle not at all associated with Morocco, ended up in that setting. It wasn't even the first fallback destination. Why not have the chase in Bangkok, Thailand, where it would make sense? Probably because they couldn't get tax breaks on location. I don't know. Indy commandeers the tuk-tuk, and despite being a rickety golf cart, it easily catches up with Voller's car in this crowded, congested city. Gangster Boy pursues in a Jaguar Mk2 because Mangold needed a way to throw in a third party for this chase scene. I will compliment the set designers because the Arabic writing on the side of the tuk-tuk does phonetically spell out Tangier in Arabic script. The big chase commences, and the tuk-tuk drives through the streets of Tangier, or actually Fez. That's where they actually filmed it, Fez, Morocco. Indy drives through alleyways and side streets, and Helena insists that Indy doesn't know what he's doing. Indy says, "I know Tangier," which I would be tempted to say is a deliberate reference to the young Indiana Jones Chronicles, when Indy visited Tangier as part of his father's lecture tour. But Mangold and the writing staff didn't do their research before, so why should I believe they did now? Besides, the line is more likely a setup to how Indy takes him down a hazardous route, thus serving as another "you're out of practice, old man" joke. Teddy says to turn left, which could be an obscure short round reference, and Indy turns right. What a stupid and ignorant old man. He is so outclassed by these two younger, smarter, and more marketable characters. There's some horrendous green screen effects. Helena has some more oh-so-charming dialogue, and one of the motorcycle thugs attacks him with a knife, even though all the other Moroccan gangsters have shotguns and submachine guns. Gangster Boy shouts out, "Helena, don't do this!" while some awful green screen effects play behind him. Why are you pleading with her? You were trying to decapitate her less than a minute ago. They catch up with Voller's car, which visibly shakes him. How did Indy catch up with him when Voller had a decent lead? Who knows? Also, behind the scenes, they rigged up the tuk-tuks with engines because realistically they could not keep the needed speed or do the needed stunt work. Indy steers the tuk-tuk down a flight of stairs. The camera shakes so badly I felt nauseous, and they crash hard into a wall. Helena and Teddy giggle as they leave Indy and commandeer another rickshaw, leaving Indy alone to right his wheels. As Indy catches up, John Williams goes back to the old well and scrounges up a smattering of familiar themes to cobble together. Most of the music in this movie is copied from earlier films. Just look at this sequence. It uses motifs from The Warehouse Escape, Raiders March, Escape from Venice, and I think I even detected Motorcycle Scherzo. Listen to this. These are obviously rehashes. Now we enter the minute-long clip released around the time of the Cannes premiere. Indy drives parallel to Teddy and Helena, and Teddy snitches that Helena sells her soul for bail money and to pay for gambling debts. Wow, she's a gambling addict too. What a role model. Behind them in the car, a pursuing mobster pulls out a sawed-off Remington 870 pump shotgun, but Gangster Boy throws off his aim. A minute ago, you wanted to decapitate Helena. Why not just shoot her? Is he stupid? Then this happens.
Resourceful, daring, beautiful, self-sufficient!
You know, writing team, there's a maxim in screenwriting called show, don't tell. If you want to communicate the traits of a character, you should utilize the visual medium of film to convey this via action. The need to bash you in the face with such dialogue makes Helena's character feel forced, like they are spelling it out to the audience. I want to break down each of these characteristics Helena claims to have and see if the film communicates this. Number 1, resourceful. I suppose you can call her resourceful. She hijacks vehicles, uses a pipe to smash a window, uses a champagne bottle as a weapon, and steals a stick of dynamite later. But compared to Marion in Raiders, this is nothing. Spielberg displays Marion's resourcefulness through actions. She uses her high alcohol tolerance to earn money and to subdue Belloc. She is also skilled with improvised weaponry, using anything at her disposal, including a burning log, a whiskey bottle, an enemy's Mauser C96 pistol, a crate, a frying pan, a knife, a set of tire stoppers, and even a rear-mounted machine gun. Nowhere in the movie does dialogue have to point out to us that Marion Ravenwood is resourceful. She just is. Number 2, daring. More like reckless. Number 3, beautiful.
Huh?
She's really funny.
Well, let's hope so.
Number 4, self-sufficient. This one is quite rich. Helena is shown to be in and out of prison and has severe gambling debts. She pawned off her engagement ring for money she proceeded to blow and had her ex-fiancé pay for her bail. That hardly sounds self-sufficient, right? Well, Indy jumps into the back of the other tuk-tuk, and this is the most physical work Harrison does in the entire movie. I think it's him at least. Whatever. The car speeds through the street, and you can clearly see the walls of Fez in the background. And it's clear they are not in Tangier. Ursa Major pulls out a PPSH-41 submachine gun, which is strange because one would think a Nazi would be averse to using a Soviet weapon, and tries shooting Helena. But Indy forces it forward with his foot. You couldn't use the whip to pull it away, maybe? Whatever. This causes the bullets to fire in front of Helena's face and into the car on the right. I am not a ballistics expert, but I figure a firearm being discharged inches from your face would be devastating. Not just from the explosive force of the muzzle blast, but from the ruptured eardrums due to the deafening gunshots. Kleber tries to ram the tuk-tuk, which based on the rickshaw's flimsy chassis, should have demolished the vehicle. But it doesn't. Helena jumps onto the car, smashes the windshield, and starts yanking on the bag around Vuller's neck. The guy in the back tries shooting Helena, but Helena pins down the gun and it doesn't fire, even though you can clearly see the barrel pointed at her torso. I guess the screenwriters didn't want the goon to pull the trigger and turn Helena into Barbara Gordon. Indy scores his first confirmed kill in 1969 by opening a door and pulling out a guy, causing him to ragdoll out the back. Gangster Boy shows up out of the ether, and Helena returns to the tuk-tuk. The shotgunner and the Jaguar shoot several times, but never hits. This causes the tuk-tuk to veer into a series of ever-narrowing alleyways. Indy drives the auto rickshaw in the Raiders theme plays. Usually, the Raiders march plays when Indy regains control of a situation, despite all odds. Like once he commandeers the truck or scores a beatdown in the Rock Crusher fight. But here the scene is practically over already. Indy says he didn't come to rescue Helena from her ex. Helena looks offended and says, "Rescue me?" Says the woman who would have been lobotomized by a Soviet SMG were it not for Indy. Behind them, Gangster Boy drives into a narrow corridor and his car is totaled. Gangster Boy is never seen again, so his character is like my claws after a manicure. Pointless. He only exists as a third party for the chase. Just replace him with a second car of Nazis. The chase is over now, and I'm left to wonder whether the writers knew they would never live up to the tuk-tuk chase in Octopussy. Oh, I love that chase. I love the creative use of India as a setting, and I loved Vijay as a friend and sidekick to James Bond. Vijay was a far more compelling character than anyone in this film. Helena lambasts Indy for not being there as her godfather. We are never given an explanation why Indy was never there for her. I don't think we are ever told when Basil died, or if even Indy knew he did die. Why did Helena not reach out? Send a letter or make a call? Even if she was 12 at the time, she could have contacted him. Who raised her then? The Indy has no compunctions against adopting children. Just look at Short Round in Mutt. Why the disconnect? Then Helena crosses a line. She says, "Family was never your strong suit."
That's for blasphemy.
This character is supposed to be likable. How dare she say something like that to Indiana Jones? She is implied to have known about his fraught relationship with his father. His divorce and his son's death are in the news, and she read the newspaper, so she probably knows about all that too. How could you say something like that to a man with a dead father and son who's going through a messy divorce? Also, don't give me this, wah, 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 I've been through so much because you weren't there, crybaby excuse. Indiana Jones lost his mother when he was 13. His sister was either stillborn or died as an infant. His grieving father emotionally neglected him. His friends died in sieges, trenches, jungles, deserts, riots, revolutions, massacres, and battles during World War I. In the novels, his first wife perished in a plane crash. His friend, Wu Han, died in his arms. He thought his girlfriend, Marion, died in an explosion. His lover, Elsa, betrayed him. His father died. Marcus Brody died. His friend Mac betrayed him and died. His son died, and his wife divorced him. Indiana Jones experienced more loss, betrayal, and loneliness than Helena could dream of, and she dares insult him. Teddy steals Indy's father's watch, and Helena teases Indy. How endearing. You know, Henry Sr. used a pocket watch in The Last Crusade. But whatever. It's probably because they needed a watch tie-in for advertising. Teddy gives the watch back and the tuk-tuk breaks down. Voller escapes, but drives right into a blockade of American soldiers. Agent Mason appears and forces Voller and his bodyguards aboard a helicopter, although they should have been left behind due to their previous actions. Agent Mason says the CIA is pulling the plug on Voller, and all their help was humoring him for his moon landing work. I don't understand why the Voller even needed the CIA's help. His private goons have done all the legwork for him, and the most we see the CIA do is tail Helena. Also, I can't believe the government didn't do this earlier. By this point, Voller has hired private security, although he's effectively a government hostage or person of interest. Security which has killed at least 3 and maybe 4 American citizens, disrupted a parade, opened fire on a crowd, punched a police officer, caused an international incident in Tangier, and forced an armed U.S. intervention in a foreign country. Voller has a pity party bragging to go to the Mediterranean. And Mason says that they're going to disappear because Voller didn't want to meet the president. Now, meeting Richard Nixon isn't exactly something I'd enjoy, but it's hardly an excuse for Voller and his men going rogue. It hardly justifies what happens next. Kleber springs into action by spraying a tear gas grenade in the soldiers' faces. It's so goofy and stupid looking that it reminded me of that dog catcher lady in Bolt. Ursa Major snaps a soldier's neck like it's nothing, indulging in that action movie cliche where everybody's spine is weaker than a popsicle stick. Kleber shoves another guy off the side of the helicopter and then shoots Agent Mason with a 1911 pistol. Mason is just sort of dazed and lies there. Voller announces that his real name is Voller, and this is meant to be dramatic. But wouldn't Mason, effectively his babysitter, know who she was looking over? Voller doesn't even say anything cartoonishly racist or condescending, and Mason dies. So yes, Agent Mason, you know, the character prominently featured in the posters and whose actress was dragged along on the press junket, she's dead now. The subplot is finished. It's quite apparent that in an earlier draft, Mason and the CIA were meant to have a more substantial role in the film, but this was lost somehow, and her role was minimized. I strongly believe that Mason's character would have been eliminated from the movie entirely. However, Disney still wanted to put a token black character on the poster, and she fit the bill. And if you think Hollywood isn't that shallow, I have some bad news for you, as someone who has seen this happen firsthand in real television productions. This is, of course, not at all a criticism towards Guyanese actress Shawnette Renee Wilson. I lay the blame squarely on the writers because, frankly, Agent Mason was the most interesting character in the whole film, and she is entirely wasted. Having an African-American CIA agent in an Indiana Jones movie is honestly a cool concept. Think about it. Mason and Voller could have a tense dynamic where Mason's job is to protect an ex-Nazi who believes her to be subhuman, resulting in verbal spars and passive-aggressive insults. Later in the movie, you could have Mason turn to Indy's side, sacrificing herself to save him or help him stop her former client. She could have been the one to fly the plane later. Better yet, I firmly believe Mason would have made a better female lead than Helena. A grizzly male archaeologist teaming up with a young female secret agent has the potential for all sorts of jokes and moments. Just imagine Indy regaling her about his time in the French and Belgian secret services in the OSS, I should say, and they bond over their mutual hatred of Nazis. Alas, this is all we get of Agent Mason. This is a big shame. Anyways, down on the ground, Teddy points out the make and model of the passing helicopter, a Sea Stallion, in a slightly clever attempt to establish his wannabe aircraft knowledge. Indy and Teddy are waiting in the beaten-up tuk-tuk, and he asks Indy if he knew the Wright brothers, because he's so old. Another missed callback opportunity. Have Indy say he hasn't, but he did know several famous aviators personally, including Charles Nungesser, Amelia Earhart, Anthony Fokker, and even the Red Baron himself. Indy was even the person who inspired the Red Baron to paint his plane red. That would have been a perfect chance to have Indy recall his adventures and allow the two to bond, showing that Indy has a lifetime of wisdom and experience. But no, we just get another "you're so old" joke. Funny, right? Helena remarks how hilarious Teddy's insult was. This is the film's self-congratulatory way of explaining how funny the joke is.
Except you had to explain it to me! If you have to explain a joke, there is no joke!
Indy says that the Nazis have Basil's notebooks. How? When did they acquire his notebooks? Indy and Helena do some back and forth bickering, and it is grating. My friend, when listening to this, said the exchange made them sound like 5-year-olds. Helena says that they need to find the MacGuffin leading to the other half of the main MacGuffin, which is in the Aegean Sea. They plan to dump Indy in a nursing home or something and take the train to Casablanca, but Indy insists that he's still relevant, something he tries to do and fails throughout the whole movie. He plugs up a radiator with chewing gum, which is meant to be impressive. Somebody online pointed out how sad it was that Indiana Jones needs to justify tagging along in justifying his own existence in his own movie. Helena says that she can find the Graphicos, the tablet leading to the other half of the dial, because she memorized her father's notes, except the boring ones. It makes you think that if Helena's so smart and she knows where the Graphicos lies, why she hasn't tried to find it before now. Also, do you remember how Henry Jones Sr. couldn't remember the clues to the Grail, so he wrote them down in a diary, thus necessitating the trip to Berlin? Necessitating? That's the word, right? Yeah. What a pathetic, old, dementia-ridden sap. Indy insists the MacGuffin will have one type of code on it, and Helena says it's another. Indy uses this doubt to stow away on Helena's expedition. Throughout the scene, Helena is chewing, which is an odd directorial choice. Once again, this movie is trying to make Helena as unflattering as possible. I really feel bad for Phoebe Waller-Bridge. Indy says they will go to the Aegean. Helena says, "What makes you think we're going to the Aegean?" Indy replies, "Archimedes was surrounded by Romans. Where else would it be?" That doesn't make any sense. So what if Archimedes was surrounded by Romans? How is that relevant? I don't see the connection between Archimedes and the Aegean. Neither Syracuse nor the Romans even owned Greece during the Second Punic War. So why would they... I'm confused. Indy also says he has a diver friend with a boat who can help them find the shipwreck. Indy knows he is in Athens, which is strange since ships often move. And the flag on the ship seen later implies Spanish registry. But the scene is over, and we get the first travel by map scene. One of the more memorable parts of the score, To Athens, plays. Indy, Helena, and Teddy take a train from Tangier to Casablanca, and from there fly to Athens. In Athens, they hitch a ride in a truck to what appears to be Cape Sounion. I'm quite puzzled why they didn't just substitute Athens for Tangier, thus allowing for a smoother transition. Just have the auction and chase in Athens. All the parties could then rush to the harbor in a race to the shipwreck. You could have an action sequence at the Parthenon, or maybe a visit to the original Antikythera on display in the city's National Archaeological Museum. Instead of a random port, have them board the boat at Piraeus. Or, since Indy's friend is Spanish, from Tangier, have Indy and the gang cross the Strait of Gibraltar into Spain, then have a map sequence of the boat sailing through the Strait of Messina to Greece. My friend enjoyed this map travel scene, but it made him wonder why there wasn't one between New York and Tangier. "I would have appreciated one going to Tangier," he said. Over the course of the map travel sequence, Helena's character does a 180. She stops being mean to Indy and prevents Teddy from insulting him further. Why'd the change? Was there some sort of deleted scene? Is she stupid? We are introduced to Ronaldo, the Spanish sea captain and diver played by Antonio Banderas. It would have been a nice callback had this been Simon Katanga instead, since that character was so cool. Ronaldo was front and center on the poster at the theater where I saw this movie, implying he would be an important character. But as soon as he's introduced, you get the sense you have when watching a slasher movie, and you know this character is going to die. I mean, should we really be surprised? Just watch the trailers again. There's a shot of him sitting on a bunk bed looking up, and another of Voller firing a gun inside the ship. It doesn't take Miss Marple to connect the two. Besides, Banderas himself said this was little more than a bit role. So it makes sense that he has about 5 lines, and one of them is when he dies. I guess they were going for a Boba Fett. Who knows? Upon seeing Ronaldo, Teddy insults his boat and his crippled leg. Helena tells him to stop with the remarks, which is surprising since she was fine with him bashing senior citizens earlier. What changed? They cast off into the Aegean, and that night Helena shows Indy a map. Their destination is the water off Antikythera Island, because Basil's notes suggest the Graphicos lies there. Helena explains how a sponge diver discovered the first half of the dial aboard a sunken Roman ship. And through Basil's notes, she deduces that the Graphicos was on the same ship, just a couple feet deeper. The ship was crewed by 100 centurions and went down in the Aegean Sea. I have many questions. Number 1, how did they sink at this spot? A storm? This is never explained. They confirm that the Graphicos was on the same ship and they were going to Alexandria because of blah 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 fake stuff later on. But was it a storm? Was it a mutiny? Did something go wrong? What happened here? Number 2, Helena says the ship carried 100 centurions. This is an easily researchable and provably false statement. A centurion is a high-ranking officer in the Roman military, in charge of 100 men. Why would the Romans, the most pragmatic land power in the classical world, run the risk of putting 100 officers on a ship that could be lost? That is the embodiment of putting all your eggs in one basket. My hypothesis is that Mangold and the writing staff assumed that the word centurion was shorthand for exotic ancient guard. Number 3, it's implied that both Basil and Helena know that the Graphicos is on this ship at this position. So why not go after it any time before now? Basil was obsessed with the dial, so if he knows where the next clue is hidden, why not put together an expedition? And if Helena knows where the Graphicos is, why not book a cheap trawler and find it? Then, with nobody in pursuit, you would have a straight shot to the other half, acquire it, and sell it. We go out to the deck of the ship, and Helena plays card tricks with Antonio Banderas and another sailor. Helena explains the magic trick and how it's a forced deck, meaning the person upon whom the trick is played believes he has free choice when...
Truth is, the game was rigged from the start.
It's a subtle act of foreshadowing, and I applaud Mangold and the others for inventing this trick. I suppose even a broken military-style clock is right once a day. Oh yeah, hey, James Mangold, is there a lore reason why in one shot Helena holds the King of Clubs, then cuts to Indy, and when it cuts back to Helena, it's an 8 of clubs?
Trick deck.
No. I force the card. I offer the mark.
Sloppy. The crew leave and the two discuss the dial, what it could do if it could allow for time travel. Indy says the trailer bait line that, I don't believe in magic, Wombat, but I've seen things. And I've come to realize that's not so much what you believe, it's how much you believe in it.
What? What are you talking about?
Indiana Jones does not believe in magic. I know people have said this before, but I need to give my take as an Indiana Jones lore expert. Indiana Jones not believing in magic is one of the dumbest ideas ever put to screen. There is no way Indiana Jones does not believe in magic, or at least an adjacent concept. He should believe in the supernatural, if not religion or a higher power. We are talking about a man who has seen the following. As a child, he saw a young prophet in Varanasi perform miracles. During his service in World War I, he traveled to Transylvania and encountered bewitched soldiers, electrical phenomena, rooms with unnatural heat and cold, and an immortal vampire heavily implied to be a reincarnation of Vlad the Impaler. In college, he touched a mysterious stone that predicted the future. He encountered Merlin. He encountered living dinosaurs. He was inside Noah's Ark. He witnessed a Hindu cult leader rip out a man's beating heart and hold it as it spontaneously combusted. He was tortured with the blood of Kali, and through either magic or suggestion was tormented with voodoo. He summoned the power of Shiva to set the Sankara stones on fire. He firsthand experienced, if not outright saw, the pure power of God as it not only massacred a platoon of Nazis, but released spirits, destroyed electrical equipment, burnt ropes, flew up into a vortex in the sky, and hid all the evidence by sucking the bodies back into it. He entered a gatehouse constructed millions of years ago by cosmic beings. He met a 1,000-year-old knight who aged slowly thanks to unwavering faith in God. He watched a man rapidly age and disintegrate by drinking from a cup and incurring the wrath of God. He drank from the Holy Grail. He used the Holy Grail to heal his mortally wounded father and watched it instantly seal up a hole in his body. He watched as a woman crossed a forbidden boundary with the Grail, causing the temple to crumble and collapse. He used a mythical metal, orichalcum, as an infinite energy source. He explored the sunken city of Atlantis, which was buried beneath the ocean, and had technology so advanced the city could withstand deep ocean pressures. He faced ancient autonoma that had primitive artificial intelligence. His friend, Sophia Hapgood, was possessed by an Atlantean king. He learned that the Atlanteans were visited by what is heavily implied to be an extraterrestrial civilization. He discovered an impossibly complex machine designed to turn mortals into gods, and witnessed it turn a man into a nightmarish, deformed mutant that decayed into a puddle of sludge. He watched it turn another man into an unembodied burst of energy that destroyed Atlantis and replaced it with a volcano. He saw the staff of Moses, watched it part into the Indian Ocean, and witnessed it turn into a snake. He saw a hall of records that could predict the future and teleport. He traveled to Mount Sinai and discovered a mineral substance that could phase between dimensions and was utilized by ancient astronauts. He saw the golden fleece transform into a lamb. He and Mac sailed to an island off the south coast of Haiti that is hinted to move locations. He found an ancient Central African immortality recipe. He fought chemically induced and actual zombies, the living dead. He faced an evil Haitian voodoo priest who could raise the dead and speak to the Loa, the spirits of Haitian voodoo. He knew a voodoo priestess and saw her turn both a Nazi and a Japanese officer into reanimated corpses. He held the lance of Longinus and watched it deflect a bullet that would have struck him. He saw the lance of Longinus function as a compass and magnetically attract itself to its other half. He saw a spirit in a hallucination help him find a weapon to secure him and rescue him from drowning. He listened to his father explain that the lance of Longinus and the spear of Leu are the same artifact. connecting Christian religion and Celtic mythology. He witnessed the halves of the spear of destiny magnetically attract to each other. He saw the spear of destiny dart around a cavern out of its own volition, like Yondu's arrow, impaling Nazis. He watched his friend Brendan step on the stone of Fal, and it screeched to confirm that he was the rightful king of Ireland. He was kidnapped and forced to analyze the remains of the Roswell incident, the body of an alien. He met a Soviet woman with psychic abilities. He experienced an abnormally strong magnetic field that attracted non-metallic substances like gold. He noted how the crystal skull was not of human construction and impossible to carve even with modern tools. He stared into the eyes of a skull that psychically communicated with him, drove away animals, and drove his friend into a temporary state of madness. He learned how ancient astronauts were revered as gods and observed every classical civilization around the world. He watched an extraterrestrial and extra-dimensional being vaporize several Soviets and Mac. He witnessed the activation of a flying saucer, teleport, and leave a gigantic lake in its wake. He knows that interdimensional travel is real. What man experiences all of that and doesn't believe in magic, or at least that there are phenomena that science can't explain? Knowing what I just listed, wouldn't you believe it? At least some of it? At this point, Indy would probably be a hardcore conservative Christian, especially based on how God treated the wicked. Also, I'm not going to try to explain how stupid that "how hard you believe in it" line is. You can believe something is true very, very hard, but that doesn't bend reality to your will. A funny mustache man believed very strongly that he was better than everybody else, but that doesn't make him right, and that doesn't make it true. My friend who watched this with me shortly after viewing Temple of Doom made an interesting observation on how this could be interpreted. During Temple of Doom, since Mola Ram doesn't actually remove Willie Scott's heart during the ritual, the supernatural elements could have been accomplished through the power of suggestion, that the belief in an object or encounter is what gives it value. During all three of the original trilogy, Indy has moments where he needs to believe in the power of the artifact. This is the idea that the power projected onto artifacts imposes supernatural powers on them. This is a fascinating concept, and in the right hands would make for a great story. But the movie lacks the depth needed to support this idea, and the notion of belief is never brought up again at any other point during the movie, especially since time travel is supposedly scientific and not belief-based. I find it telling that my friend, who knows barely anything about Indiana Jones other than the main movies, invented a more complex and coherent theme for an Indiana Jones film than a team of 4 professional screenwriters. Back to the scene after all that. Helena replies that the only thing worth believing in is cash. She asks what Indy would do if he had access to time travel. Indy replies with what is generally considered the best monologue in the movie and the best acting by Ford. Indy says if he could pull a Cher and turn back time, he'd stop Mutt from enlisting for the Vietnam War to spite him. Mutt dies in Vietnam, or should I say on the way back to his home planet, which causes Marion to be so distressed that she and Indy are now filing for divorce. Wow. James Mangold and the other writers really did not like Mutt. The cold brutality of killing him off screen, rather than recasting him or just letting him have a family somewhere else, shocked an audience that, according to people online, used to hate him. Now that he's deceased, people realize that Mutt wasn't that bad. Maybe because of what we have instead of him. This explains why Indy is so down in the dumps. Except that this is ridiculous if you think about it for too long, like I have. Why on earth would Mutt Williams, a known rebel and countercultural greaser who dropped out of several schools, voluntarily fight in Vietnam? Surely he would be the last person in America to go fight in what was considered an imperialist rich man's war. He wasn't even drafted, he enlisted. The son of Indiana Jones, of all people, should know that war is a terrible experience. Indiana Jones fought in the trenches of World War I and witnessed young men like him riddled by machine guns and pointless charges. He also fought in World War II and experienced the horrors of the Nazi industrialized war machine. Jones would have told Mutt these things. In addition to this, Mutt's stepdad, Colin Williams, was an RAF pilot who died during World War II, so he should know the dangers and what losing a loved one to war would feel like. We are never told what led to the falling out with Mutt. Mutt may have been brash, but not stupid, and therefore he would not have made such an impulsive decision based on an argument. Even if he did try going to war, Indy has connections in the military, and surely would have negotiated a safer position or have him denied service. And for a hardcore Indiana Jones fan, Mutt dying in Vietnam brings up a chilling thought. In the episode Winds of Change in the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, Indy works as a translator at the Paris Peace Conference and helps a young man. I want to show you several scenes and consider what it means.
I am working in Paris as a pastry chef, sometimes as a waiter as well. My name is Winai Kwok, sir. I am Vietnamese.
Tôi đã đến Aqua Ong đặt là đẹp.
Ông nói chẳng được tôi.
Not very well, I'm afraid.
Sir, we need your help.
We?
A small group of my countrymen and me. We are a delegation of patriots. We have written a petition.
Is this it?
For weeks now we've tried to present it. No one will hear us. No one will even receive it. That is why I come to you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Wynn.
I know you can do this. I heard you in the restaurant. You are close to President Wilson. I know that you are a very important man.
I'm just a translator. I just happen to be president.
We have tried everywhere. No one will listen. All the doors shut in our faces. All we ask for is assistance. Please.
Well, I can't promise you anything.
Thank you, sir.
Are you crazy?
But, sir, all
Crying
they want...
out loud. Vietnam's on the other side of the world.
But so is Japan.
The Japanese were our allies. They fought on our side. No, I'm sorry. Schedule is crazy enough as it is.
It won't take long, sir.
Do you have any idea just how busy we are?
Yes, sir, I do.
And what are the French going to say? Hell, Vietnam belongs to them.
But, sir, the president says the whole
President.
world...
Henry, listen to me. You've done well here as a translator. I've already marked you down for a job. When this is all over, there's a post in the State Department I have in mind for you. But if you come aboard, there's one thing you have to learn.
Presidents come and go. Diplomats stay.
Now, I'm not criticizing Woodrow Wilson. All I'm saying is he won't be around much longer. We will. Think about it. Something else on your mind?
No.
No, sir. Didn't you hear me just now?
Yes, sir, I heard. And I also heard what you said about presidents, about how they come and go. And it reminded me of an old man I met in Mexico once who said pretty much the same thing.
Oh, he did?
He was a peasant. Most likely he's dead now. I don't even know his name. But I'll never forget what he told me. It's maybe the reason I'm here now. He said the men in power change, but the people go on suffering.
Look, Jones.
Sir, I really think the Vietnamese ought to be heard. Maybe people think their country's not important, and it's not our business what happens there, but it is important. These are people just like any other people. Who are we to say they can't be heard? Sir, the whole world has come to this city. Why shouldn't they have the opportunity to make their case? And we as Americans should be right behind them. Half an hour is all they need. Is that too much to ask? All right, when you get in there, keep it simple. Concentrate on the American. He'll listen, so speak mainly to him.
We understand. Thank you, sir.
Chokong, my man.
Come in. On behalf of the people of Vietnam, we do not ask for independence or freedom from French colonial rule, only the implementation of these points. A general amnesty for all political prisoners, equal rights for the Vietnamese and the French, freedom of the press, freedom to meet and assemble, freedom to emigrate and travel abroad, better schools, abolition of rule by the French president's decree, and the appointment of Vietnamese members to the French Parliament. Sir, that is all.
Thank you. Your petition will be considered. Any questions? Monsieur Bertin.
Sorry.
No. At least they heard us.
I don't think they listen to anyone anymore.
Someday they will listen to Ho Chi Minh.
Ho Chi Minh?
That's what we call him. It means father of our country.
It's not a title I deserve. Thank you, Mr. Jones. You did your best.
I think of these often. The show did a stellar job of displaying how the arrogance of the colonial powers during the Paris Peace Conference laid the groundwork for long-lasting conflicts. But now it has a haunting, albeit unintentional, veneer to it. It's sort of disturbing thinking that Indy was friends with a man who went on to control the force that ultimately killed his son. Can you imagine the impact this would have had on Indy? It's a shame the writers did not consider this. Also, this ruins Marion's character, because Indy didn't do a good enough job at comforting her. She abandoned him. What? The next day, Helena is rifling through the ship's drawers like she's looking for scissors in The Last of Us. Apparently, Helena's content with stealing from her hosts. She finds a stick of dynamite, steals it, and because she is so intelligent, she, since there's no point at which she could have put it thereafter, stuffs the volatile explosive device down her pants minutes before going underwater. She also spots one of the hunky shirtless crewmen and ogles him a bit. The joke isn't funny, but I did get a chuckle thinking what would have happened if the roles were reversed. People would go nuts. Everyone goes on deck, and the plan is explained. 4 people will go down in the dive suits. Indy, Helena, Antonio Banderas, and another sailor listed on the wiki as Popeye. This is pretty funny because Helena in her Tangier outfit looks exactly like Olive Oil from the Popeye cartoons. Ronaldo explains that they'll put on breathing apparatuses connected via hoses. Even though scuba diving has been around for years at this point, and descend 300 feet. Ronaldo's brilliant trick is to go to the wreck, stay down for 3 minutes, and resurface by inflating life jackets. Now, I may be a lycanthropic landlubber, but I don't need scuba lessons to know how ridiculous this prospect is. Whoever wrote this sequence has never taken a cursory glance at diving, because rapidly ascending 300 feet is a death sentence. Why? Because of the bends. The bends is a phenomenon where a diver rapidly surfaces without decompression, causing nitrogen bubbles to enter the bloodstream, leading to dizziness and even death. For example, workers on the underwater caissons on the Brooklyn Bridge suffered from the bends, and some of the cases were fatal. Also, I consulted a maritime archaeologist, and she told me that not only would the bends be a problem, but there would be a huge risk of an embolism. This is when a bubble in the blood clogs an artery. Keep these dangers in mind. Ronaldo says they can only be underwater for 3 minutes. I timed out the scene, and they were underwater for 4 minutes, 45 seconds of screen time. We are truly dealing with cinematic geniuses. Teddy steals Ronaldo's lighter. Charming. Helena hands Indy a tot of brandy that she stole. Drinking alcohol before a dive also sounds like a bad idea. What do I know? One more thing before the dive scene. There are writhing eels in the waters below, which Teddy remarks look like snakes, Indiana Jones's greatest fear. There are no snakes in this movie, so eels are the closest we get, which have a vague resemblance. They couldn't set the dive in a place inhabited by coral snakes, which could have been a neat spin on the trope. True, that would have been geographically implausible, but still. Note, the writers missed the chance to include a snake encounter in Morocco. The Jema Al-Fna market in Marrakesh is infamous for its cobra charmers, which would have been incorporated and could have been incorporated into Tangier. Another piece of information about the eels. Ronaldo refers to them as anguillas, which corresponds to the real endangered European eel. They look nothing like they do in the movie. The eels in the film appear to be modeled after the scarier moray eels. The four go down, first to the shelf and then into the depths, where the shipwreck half lies. You can't see anything down here, not because of the lack of sunlight, but due to all the CGI. Indy and Helena enter the shipwreck, where they see CGI eels. Even though Indy was distressed by eels on the surface, he appears calm now. They encounter a skeleton so decayed and weathered, it looks like he follows Mitch McConnell's skincare routine. Helena grabs the chest he's holding and leaves. But then, oh no! Eels swarm Indy, and I'm sure that if I could see anything through the CGI haze, I would be very afraid. Indy flails around and waves a flare, and eventually they leave him alone and Helena helps him out. The eels don't even do anything, like crack his faceplate or sever his breathing tube. Do you remember Shadow of the Tomb Raider? In that game, when Lara Croft encounters a moray eel during an underwater sequence, the eel wraps around her and bites her arm, quickly depleting her oxygen, and will kill you if you don't escape. It plays heavily into horror and claustrophobia. That is a great archaeology adventure game. You should play that instead of watching this. From beneath the surface, they notice a boat pull up alongside the trawler. This is Voller, who apparently tracked them here through Basil's notes. Popeye the sailor has his breathing tube cut and he immediately dies. No flailing around, no resurfacing with a life jacket. How Voller knew which tube to cut when any of the four could be holding the chest, I do not know.
Breathe air!
Helena, Indy, and Ronaldo surface by inflating the life vests on their bodies and see that Voller's goons have slaughtered the entire crew, except Teddy for some reason. Why keep him alive? It's not like he's valuable as a hostage. Voller holds all the cards here. And it's not as if the thugs have compunctions against killing a child. They've already killed a half-dozen civilians thus far. Voller likely believes that once this is over, Teddy may well never have been born. And Kleber, since he's so cartoonish, would probably jump at the chance of getting rid of one more brown person. Ronaldo sees the bodies and asks who these people are. Indy mutters, Nazis. Wait, did Indy not tell Ronaldo that this mission was dangerous in a race against Nazis? Indy didn't warn Ronaldo? That's inconsiderate. Everyone heads inside. Note: during this whole sequence, you can see Antikythera Island in the distance. Funnily enough, I've actually been on a cruise ship that sailed past Antikythera Island, even though I didn't realize it at the time. I took pictures. It looks nothing like it does here. Anyways, everybody's seated in the boat's cabin. There's a spear gun on the wall. Chekhov's gun principle dictates that since the spear gun is so prominently featured in a shot, it will be used. This is not the case. Another wasted opportunity for having a grisly Nazi death. Voller sits them all down and pries open the box. Inside is a wax tablet, the graphic host that points to the location of the other half. It is a secondary MacGuffin that leads to the other half of the MacGuffin. When watching, my friend asked me, "Is this the thing that leads you to the thing?" I nodded, and all he could say was, "Oh my god." He hates tacky MacGuffin-based storytelling. The graphic host is written in a Polybius cipher. Helena quips how Indy owes her 50 quid. "Lady, there are 3 cadavers around you that are still warm. Now is not the time for jokes." Can she not take anything seriously? Voller demands Indy translate the tablet at gunpoint. Indy, who should know what happens if he doesn't comply because the same situation occurred with his father in Last Crusade, says no. Voller applies pressure by shooting Ronaldo several times with a Walther PPK, which is funny because that is James Bond's preferred sidearm, and Mikkelsen played a Bond villain. Ronaldo defiantly cries, "Ninguna una palabra." Not a word in Spanish. This is ironic considering what Helena is about to do. Antonio Banderas' character is dead now, by the way. He is utterly wasted. Maybe Banderas lived up to his name, and red flags went off in his mind when he read the script, so he wanted to get out of the movie as soon as possible. The strange thing is, seeing Antonio Banderas in this film made me think of a far superior one, Puss in Boots and The Last Wish. That's a movie that knew how to write a past his prime character, returning to the saddle to deal with his mortality. It's humorous to note that the trio of Indy, Helena, and Teddy is an inferior parallel to the man-woman-child dynamic of Puss, Kitty, and Perrito. And the villain, what can I say? The wolf is leagues more intimidating than Voller, thanks to competent writing. And that's just not my bias of being a werewolf. Note: Mads Mikkelsen decided to have Voller shoot Ronaldo because if he didn't, no one would take him seriously, because Voller really has all his henchmen do his work for him. I find it intriguing that the only action of any consequence performed by Voller was initiated by the actor and not the writers. Indy makes a pathetic attempt to tackle Ursa Major, which goes about as well as you'd expect. Ursa Major manhandles him back onto the bed, reminding us of how frail Indy is. He also punches Indy with full force across the head. Keep this in mind, because Indy is still conscious after this bear of a man clocks him. Voller once again asks politely for Indy to translate, and Helena pipes up that she doesn't do noble deaths, insulting Ronaldo as his corpse is dragged away. She says she will translate the tablet for $100,000. You are being held at gunpoint on a ship in the middle of the sea. You are in no position to negotiate. Nevertheless, Voller whips out a purse of what I presume are blood diamonds to pay her for solving it.
Are these blood diamonds? Are they Holocaust diamonds?
No!
This man was essentially a prisoner of war, and at best had government payroll. How is he this independently wealthy? Helena decodes the tablet and breaks into a smug lecture, joking and quipping. This is in poor taste. She reads the tablet. My machine lies with me in the city I left, where wolves teach men to walk, under one of 9 I lie. She reveals a stick of dynamite in her pants to Indy, which she must have stolen and slipped into there and under her dive suit before they submerged. Helena has never seen Lost, which establishes that dynamite can potentially be extremely unstable. Not only did Helena put dynamite down her pants, but she also probably went underwater where pressure and moisture could have triggered the stick to detonate. Am I still supposed to believe that she's intelligent? Also, when she turns, you can see that she was in plain view of Ursa Major, who would have immediately spotted it. Helena says the dial rests in the Library of Alexandria, steals a cigarette from Voller, and since we must give Indy something to do, because, fine, he's the titular character, Indy puts the cigarette to the fuse to ignite it. This is the sort of escape plan Indy would formulate, but since Helena is the real star of the show, she has the agency. She has the bright idea. She gives him the cigarette, and she puts the plan to action. Voller seems giddy about the prospect of the other dial half being located in Alexandria. Why? He should be upset, because the dial half is almost certainly destroyed. The Library of Alexandria was demolished, either by Caesar, or the early Christians, or the early Muslims. In the 21st century, the ruins of the Library of Alexandria have never been uncovered, and they would have remained lost in 1969. Voller should be distraught, because the dial is either destroyed or buried under a major Egyptian city, and the library is impossible to find. Also, finding the lost Library of Alexandria would have been a far more compelling plot than what we have. Helena tosses the dynamite into the hold as a distraction, and amid the chaos, Indy grabs the Graphicos and escapes with Helena and Teddy on Voller's speedboat. The dynamite staggers Voller and his goons. The dynamite would have been channeled upward by the confined shape of the hold and probably killed everyone, but don't think too hard about that. Indy jumps from one boat to another over a 1-foot gap, which due to Harrison Ford's mobility issues is considered an awe-inspiring feat worthy of the Raiders riff. Helena drives off, Kleber comes out and fires his gun 3 times, but Indy doesn't even duck or go for cover, he sort of just stands there. Helena is laughing and self-congratulating her cleverness.
I don't recall Indy orgasming on a boat after an action scene where 4 people died.
My friend was just murdered.
Sorry.
Indy just says, my friend was just murdered. This is a mood killer. Helena says an awkward, sorry. I just had to repeat it because it's so goofy. Then a few seconds later, she's back to her jokey usual self. This moment is supposedly major to Helena's quote-unquote character arc, but her lack of taking anything seriously is off-putting. She was cracking jokes and one-liners while bodies were dropping. Also, if you think about it, Indy and Helena are responsible for the deaths of Ronaldo and his crew. Ronaldo is living his best life, having fun with his friends, and an old acquaintance asks for a favor. He says yes, welcomes them aboard, and presumably does the job for free. As a result, his men are gunned down and drowned, he is kneecapped and shot, and the boat is sunk. Maybe it's fortunate that Short Round or Sala aren't here, since Indy seems to be a death sentence to anyone with whom he associates. Helena explains that she didn't tell them everything about the dial. In fact, she led them towards the Library of Alexandria because Archimedes' tomb is in Sicily, and this was a red herring concocted by Archimedes. Helena is the one to lead Indy on and is the one to figure out that the Graphicos is heavier than it should be, which means the real clue is inside. This poses a question. The Antikythera was found on the same ship, covered in protective wax. Would the Romans aboard the ship not think that if one Syracusan artifact is encased in wax, another might be too? And what if she was wrong? What if Helena was wrong and gauged the weight of the tablet incorrectly? Then they're screwed. One point I see brought up is that Helena could have just lied and fabricate a translation. A counter-argument for this is that Helena knew she was lying by omission, since the tablet is heavier than it should be and there's another clue inside. But no, she did divulge critical information to the Nazis. She told Voller that the other half of the dial was within Archimedes' tomb, and that Archimedes only lived in two places, Alexandria and Syracuse. This supposedly told Voller how to follow them to the tomb. Had Helena lied and provided a false translation, Voller would have had no idea that the dial was in Archimedes' tomb, or that the tomb could be in only one or two locations. Remember when Ronaldo died and he cried out in Spanish, "Ninguna una palabra," not a word? Well, Helena just tattled and did tell the Nazis important details. She couldn't even honor a man's dying wish. Indy takes a lighter in a flammable liquid that melts the Graphicos, revealing a golden disc underneath. It appears to be CGI wax because it melts too quickly and Indy's hands aren't burned when he immediately picks it up. Upon seeing this, Helena remarks how selling this would get her and Teddy out of the hole and then some. Ma'am, the last we saw you had over $100,000 worth of blood diamonds. We never see you put the diamonds down, so I presume you still have them. Based on your asking price, you now have more than $800,000 in today's currency. Either James Mangold forgot about the diamonds, or Helena is more than $100,000 in debt. I don't know which is worse. The disc says, "Search where Dionysus hears each whisper like a hurricane." This indicates the dial is in the ear of Dionysius, a cave in Sicily. Unless Indy mistranslated something, something's wrong here. Archimedes would not write down the word hurricane because it is a Taino word from the Caribbean. And Archimedes knew nothing about the New World, especially the Columbus-era New World. Teddy remarks that they have a full tank, so they head to Sicily. A travel-by-map sequence ensues. Voller's men ready a lifeboat with an outboard motor, and while waiting, Voller picks up a random pair of binoculars, notes how Jones is heading west, and immediately knows they are headed for Sicily. There are several geography problems. Firstly, the distance from the point on the map east of Antikythera Island to Syracuse is about 400 miles. I'm not sure that the speedboat Indian Company are in could make that jump nonstop. I know for sure that the lifeboat Voller has couldn't. Secondly, Voller looks through the conveniently placed binoculars and remarks that they are heading west. This is passed off as clever and a smart deduction. This is silly, because why does it matter that they are heading west? That is not indicative of their ultimate destination. The Peloponnese is directly next to the west of the position on the map, so for all Voller knows, they could be just going to the nearest landmass. What if they sailed north, back to Athens? Would Voller assume they're going someplace else, when for all he knows they could be going to a city to catch a plane to Egypt? And if they sailed south to Crete or east to Mykonos, what then? No, the fact the boat is heading west is not proof that Sicily is the right destination. Thirdly, despite being on a sinking ship and having a dinghy as the only means of transport, Voller ends up in Sicily first. He's there so early, in fact, that he charters a van, has a World War II Heinkel bomber stocked and fueled up in a hangar nearby, and has 24 Nazi cosplayers on standby too. How did he arrange all this? I saw defenders forwarding one or two claims. Either Voller tailed Indy to Sicily, or deduced Sicily was the destination and beat them there. I'll dismantle both these claims. First, there's no plausible way Voller could follow Indy to Sicily in a dinghy with an outboard motor for 400 miles. Second, if Voller lucked out with the binoculars and knew Indy was going to Sicily, how did they beat Indy there? Voller and his friends are trapped on a broken boat with a lifeboat as their only mode of transportation. If they had arrived by seaplane to attack the trawler, this would have been no problem, but Voller is lost at sea. I am supposed to believe that, although Indy has a substantial lead in a full tank, Voller takes a dinghy to Greece, acquires a car, charters a plane, flies to Sicily, and has enough time to prepare his plane, get a van, and arrive in the exact location he needs to ambush Teddy. I did the calculations, too. From the nearest major port, Suda in Crete, at 20 knots, it would take about a day, 24 hours, for Jones to reach Catania, the nearest port to Syracuse. Starting off with Jones at an advantage and with Voller with a lifeboat, this seems a bit too tight. How did this happen? Anyways, we arrive in modern Syracuse. We see Teddy in the main square as a wedding procession occurs, waiting for Indy and Helena to procure supplies. A preppy kid in fancy clothes mocks Teddy for wearing a straw hat, upsetting him, which is the movie's way of telling us that the kid is mean. Therefore, it is morally permissible to steal from him. Helena walks over and Teddy complains that Indy is now in charge. Helena has 2 sandwiches. She didn't think of buying one for Indy. Helena talks with food in her mouth, which is a bizarre choice from the director. Is this supposed to be comedic? I feel bad for Phoebe Waller-Bridge because this makes her look gross. Did you know that in movies, when someone has to eat something like ice cream, a new item needs to be made for each take? In the Diary of a Wimpy Kid movie, for instance, when an actor ate ice cream, he would do the take, have one lick, then throw the cone away. The prop master would then make a new ice cream cone for him and redo the take. Phoebe Waller-Bridge probably had to eat the same sandwich about a dozen times. Helena ogles some Italian men and says she's still in charge, then returns to meet Indy. While they do this, Teddy watches a puppet show recounting a folk legend of the siege of Syracuse, showing a dragon attacking a Roman soldier. One point of praise I will give the writers is that the foreshadowing is consistently good, but this brings up problems later. Teddy bumps into the preppy kid and pickpockets him, because stealing is okay, as long as the person you're robbing gave you a nasty look. Then Teddy goes and buys gelato. I can't fault Teddy for having gelato while in Italy. It is quite good. But Teddy and the screenwriters should know better than to wander off in a strange city. Later on, Indy remarks that Teddy is smart. Well, since recruiting those treacherous jungle guides and raiders, Indy has never been a good judge of character. Well, Teddy is an orphan, and his non-existent parents never taught him about stranger danger, so he walks under a dark archway where Voller just happens to be waiting for him, with a cinematic frame showing the boat in the background. A mighty coincidence that Ursa Major grabs the kid and pulls him into a van, Jared Fogle style. Indy and Helena realize they need to reach the tomb first. Indy and Helena commandeer a car, and Indy reasons that they will keep Teddy alive because he knows where the tomb is. Okay, but what about once he outlives his usefulness? Then they'll kill him. Also, my friend, who's only casually acquainted with the movies, remarked that based on his previous actions, Indiana Jones would not have let the Nazis escape with Teddy so easily after only a couple of feeble steps, because he is characterized as being protective of the innocent, especially children. But Indy dismisses the idea of Teddy being in danger and prioritizes acquiring the dial. They drive to the site known as the Ear of Dionysius, but for some reason they decided to film at the Temple of Argento. Helena and Indy carry huge backpacks, rope, shovels, and other tools that they never use. They slip away from a tour group and enter the Ear, a real cave with echoing acoustics. Following the echoes bouncing off the walls and singing a silly song, they climb through a hidden hole and enter the tomb of Archimedes. It makes you wonder how no tourists or park rangers discovered this obvious passageway. The two of them climb up a cliff to enter the tomb. Indy complains about being old. Did you hear that, everybody? Indy is so old. Yucky wucky. He then rambles about being shot 9 times, voodoo, and the black sleep of Kali. I'm frankly shocked that they acknowledge Temple of Doom's existence in this movie instead of dropping it into a memory hole. I'm shocked Disney hasn't done that already like they did with Song of the South. Indy and Helena cross a rope bridge, and Indy asks where Helena met Teddy. Helena says Teddy was a street beggar in Marrakesh who tried to pickpocket Helena and wouldn't let go of her. She says that she slammed a car door on him several times and he still held on. This is presented as a joke, but it seems rather disturbing. Teddy is a child after all, and Helena Shaw slammed a car door on him. At this point, she's basically Jason Voorhees. This is blatantly ripped off from Temple of Doom, where Short Round tried pickpocketing Indy in Shanghai, which explains how they met. And don't you dare tell me this is an homage to Temple and Helena reflecting Indy's character arc, because Helena has done far worse than Indy ever did. Indy also didn't beat Short Round. Indy doesn't acknowledge all this as familiar, and there was a prime chance to reference Short Round, but the writers decide not to take it. That might be a good thing. Based on how James Mangold has treated the legacy characters so far, he probably would have had Short Round executed during the Cultural Revolution. Indy also says, nobody memorizes all their dead father's notebooks for the money. Well, unless they want to use the information in the notebooks to make money. This is just another feeble attempt to force character development onto us. They enter a narrow passageway, and the writers probably realized that they forgot to add the classic creepy crawly segment from the Indiana Jones movies. Raiders had tarantulas and snakes, Temple had the bugs, Crusade had the rats, and Skull had scorpions and ants. But Indy must now contend with the most disgusting creatures of all. Low-budget computer-generated imagery. Yucky wucky. Watching this, my friend said, "Oh, I see. She's going to start freaking out, and he'll be calm." and his eyebrows furrowed when Harrison began yelling along with Phoebe. Harrison and Phoebe scream and panic as digital millipedes crawl all over them, freaking out and running out of the corridor to shake them off. This might seem strange to even the most casual Indy fan, because never in any of the previous films did bugs trouble Indiana Jones. In Raiders, he is the one who stays calm and brushes tarantulas off Dr. Octopus. In Temple, he remains unfazed by the room swarming with insects. And don't forget this scene from Crystal Skull. Why is he afraid of critters now? Even if they're venomous, they didn't trouble him before. In fact, in the book Mystery of Mount Sinai, when he saw a poisonous centipede in the Yucatan, he was unfazed. Note, all the bugs are CGI because they were apparently too dangerous to appear on set. In that case, could you not write around this to provide a better opportunity to use practical effects?
Yeah, sure, as long as I don't move, I'm okay. Frozen in position. Stop breathing. It's a flying scorpion. Yeah, great.
I became the Bugmeister, and I found a guy in England who did bugs.
That one's on my neck. Can we get that one off my neck?
So we created this whole really disgusting bug hotel where we kept the bugs, and we had all sizes and varieties, and Kate Capshaw was not acting when we were dropping the bugs on her.
They make me do the most awful things. I have to play with bugs.
Get in the sweat and do the bugs.
No.
Do the bugs.
No.
Do the bugs.
No.
She promised me when she wouldn't do the snake, she'd do the bugs.
Okay, I'll do the bugs.
Do the bugs.
I was really asking people, is there a pill? There must be something I can take to keep myself from freaking out, because I don't want everyone to look at the movie and go, she's on drugs. But I did take something that was like a relaxant, and I came to the set. I was like, hi, Stephen. He goes, hi. I go,
Somewhere amid all of this tomb raiding is a deleted sequence where Indy and Helena use a lever to move a globe from a statue of Atlas. This does not appear, making it even more baffling why a shot from the scene was used in trailers, right up until release. Maybe Disney thought I was too stupid to notice. While Indy and Helena navigate the tomb, Voller arrives at the site in his van. I don't know why they arrived so far behind Indy when they left first, but I guess continental drift made their GPS coordinates go haywire, and they became lost. Voller keeps Teddy alive for no reason and drags him into the cave. Teddy makes an abortive escape attempt, so he is handcuffed to Ursa Major. Ursa Major is very smart, so he puts the handcuff key and his freaking submachine gun in his back pocket within reaching distance of his captive. When they cross the rope bridge, Teddy steals the handcuff key, but in the process, he and Ursa Major fall into a subterranean river. The current slams them into a rusted metal grate, blocking the passage, with a conveniently child-sized hole in it. Teddy frees himself from the handcuff, swims through the hole, and handcuffs Ursa Major to it. Teddy swims away, and Ursa Major drowns. Oh, I'm sorry. You were expecting Ursa Major's character to pay off in the form of a climactic Pat Roach-style second act big enemy fistfight, a known and time-honored Indiana Jones tradition? Well, I bet you feel like an idiot now. Am I not the only one who saw that the inclusion of Olivier Richters, aka Ursa Major, was a prime candidate to serve as a Pat Roach stand-in? Pat Roach, for those of you who don't know, was a famous stuntman who played the shirtless Nazi mechanic in Raiders, ultimately getting chopped up by a propeller in the famous fight. That scene set the precedent for an Indy tradition, where Indy must battle a bigger, tougher enemy in a chaotic fistfight, where Indy needs to defeat him using wit, luck, and his environment. Raiders had the mechanic on the flying wing. Temple had the thuggy guard, also played by Roach, at the Rock Crusher fight. Crusade had Vogel on the tank, and Crystal had the fight with the Russian in the Ant Stampede. Having a gentle giant like Richter's face off against Jones would be fascinating, since Indy is 70 years old, facing off against a man who casually snapped a man's neck. Perhaps Indy could use his whip in the fight, or exploit a weakness or a feature of his environment. It would be a battle for the ages. But it was not to be. I have a conspiracy theory, if you will, as to why this didn't happen. I suspect that the script did call for Indy and Ursa Major to have a fight, but medical issues interfered. The first incident is well publicized. Harrison Ford was injured on set, but what is less well known is that Richter's was injured on set as well, during the New York sequence. Having both parties hurt was hardly conducive, likely resulting in the fight being scrapped. Instead, we get this. The scene is, funnily enough, the most horrifying in the entire film. Of course, Ursa Major is playing a Nazi, but to Richter's credit, he shows panic and fear. A child third of his size has doomed him. When I saw the movie, I half expected this to be a fake-out. There was already a hole in the grate, and it's been exposed to moving water and rusted for 2,000 years. So Ursa Major will obviously break out of the grate, connecting the handcuff off-screen, and appear later in a twist. No, that's the end of it. Teddy tied a man to a grate and left him to drown. They propped up this big guy as a hulking force of nature, and he's killed by a kid. They took my beloved Ursa Major and humiliated him. Meanwhile, Indy and Helena enter a chamber with a reflecting pool, in which there is a vent pumping out methane gas. Helena starts coughing, but Indy doesn't after first breathing it in, because he's on death's door anyways. This is the only booby trap, by the way. The only booby trap we see is a geyser of gas that makes Helena cough. Indy figures out the trick to the room is related to water displacement because the writer's knowledge of Archimedes was limited to the anecdote of him in his bathtub. I find it very interesting how this is the one scene where Indy does any true puzzle solving instead of Helena. And this particular scene was specifically shown to the audience in the trailer, almost to give the impression to the viewer that Indy has agency and is not a sidekick in his own movie. Funny that. They fill up the pool and they reach the dial. Indy and Helena reach the burial place of Archimedes, who is laid to rest with the other half of the dial. It doesn't make sense that Archimedes and his assistants were able to build an elaborate tomb for him during a siege, seeing as Archimedes doesn't survive the siege, meaning he wouldn't have had the time to construct a tomb like this. But anyways, Indy looks in the sarcophagus while Helena examines a frieze on the side. Helena draws attention to the frieze, and Indy, an archaeologist, is not initially interested. She notices how there's a phoenix depicted, one with what appear to be propellers. This is an odd choice because nowhere else in the film is the phoenix referred to as a phoenix. It is believed to be a dragon, not a bird. Nonetheless, Indy discovers another unsettling artifact. Archimedes is wearing a wristwatch, or as the kids say, a bust-down rollie on the wrist. Indy says that clocks aren't invented for a millennium. The two realize that not only does the dial work, but Archimedes used it to interact with the future. Phoebe Waller-Bridge finally uses her acting skills to deliver the line, "Dad was right, it works." She has talent. It's a shame she only comes across as genuine on rare occasions. Voller shows up and holds him at gunpoint. Voller tells Indy that he already lost his son, so does he really want to lose his goddaughter? I will respond only by posting the following YouTube comment. Voller takes the dial, puts the two parts together, then gets some keystone piece, and says, History... No, it's Russian. Whatever. Okay, history's greatest moment. It's in. Which sounds awesome because of Mads Mikkelsen, even though it makes no sense. Then Teddy, who since escaping has watched from atop a nearby statue, tackles Kleber and tosses Indy his gun and starts blasting. He shoots one nameless, interchangeable thug and misses every other shot. It's so bad it reminds me of that scene from the Die Hard parody in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Funny how Han Solo now has the accuracy of a stormtrooper. Something interesting I noticed is that, according to the antique firearm range Battlefield Vegas, the Walther P-38's magazine contains 8 rounds. Indy fired 8 shots on screen as well as another off-screen before we are shown anybody returning fire, for a grand total of 9 bullets fired from a gun with an 8-bullet capacity. Whoever did the editing and sound effects for the scene must have dyscalculia or must have less firearm knowledge than your average legislator. Also, I want to point out here that throughout the entire movie, we never see Indy carrying his trusty revolver. He doesn't even wear his gun belt or holster, even in the prologue. You would think that since Indy is less physically capable, to even the odds he would have been more reliant on his tools. Why doesn't he have his revolver? Look, I understand that in modern Hollywood, guns are scary, and even Red Hood and Punisher aren't allowed to shoot people anymore, because having a good guy using firearms might convince people that guns can be useful, when Hollywood has openly tried to subvert guns in general, even though most of their characters use guns. And obviously, Disney doesn't want its characters holding guns, even though this is Indiana Jones. But Indy always packed a handgun as an essential piece of adventuring equipment. There is no way Indy wouldn't have taken a gun, or at least purchased one after the Tangier incident if he couldn't bring it on the plane. But I digress. Helena and Teddy run down a passageway, and Indy, being the competent marksman he is, rises out of cover and looks away from the enemy to shout at them. Predictably, he is shot, either in the clavicle or the shoulder. They missed a prime opportunity by not having him grazed in the eyeball, thus explaining why by the 90s he wears an eye patch. But doing basic research is too much to ask from these writers. Also, Indiana Jones is as fragile as peanut brittle at age 70, so he is dying from this. That bullet appears close to his heart and several arteries. Yeah, I have bad news for you, Indy. By the way, James Mangold, is there a lore reason why when Helena turns around, she knocks some of the styrofoam they used to build the set loose? This movie cost $300 million. Voller looks at Indy and decides he wants to take him along, as opposed to doing the logical thing and shooting him. Helena and Teddy are watching from about 20 feet away, and no one tries chasing them. Helena says, "We can't leave him." What? Why? He's surrounded by armed enemies? That hardly stopped you before. Teddy finds the way out and Helena follows because apparently there's an exit just behind the main goal of the temple, because this is a Tomb Raider level now. Voller and company drag the crippled Indy all the way back through the cave system, across the repaired bridge, and through the bug tunnel, which we never see Voller and his goons encountering, and there are no bugs when they go back through. Teddy and Helena emerge, and somehow, since they had a head start against the other guys, Teddy and Helena end up behind them. The bad guys put Indy in the van and make for the airport. Meanwhile, Helena discovers the tires on the car they used were slashed, but the Nazis were too stupid to notice the motorcycle 20 feet away, and the keys happen to be right next to it. Are they stupid? The two pursue them. In the van, Voller says some technobabble about the dial and reveals his evil plan. Voller has a Heinkel bomber and a bunch of Nazi cosplayers, and using the dial, he plans to travel back in time to August 1939, about 2 weeks before the invasion of Poland on the 1st of September and the onset of World War II. From Sicily, he'll fly to Munich, where the young version of him is due for a meeting with the funny mustache man himself. Voller's brilliant plan is to kill Hitler, take his place, and rule a 1,000-year Reich.
Any questions?
Yes! Several!
Why in the world, with time travel at your disposal, would you choose to go back only 2 weeks before the war began? That changes nothing. By that point, the war machine is already in motion and the troops are amassing on the Polish frontier. How does Voller believe he'll arrive at the meeting? Not only will he be flying over fascist Italian airspace, but Nazi airspace too. And does he believe his fake modified plane will go unnoticed by air traffic control when it's not on any records? And what about the younger version of Voller? What happens to him? Do you just knock him out before the meeting? That's a short-term solution. But what about once the older Voller takes power? How does Voller think he'll explain two versions of himself living simultaneously? I see that Voller learned about the rules of succession from Prince Hans from Frozen, to where he's so deluded he thinks that by killing Hitler he'll be able to instantly usurp power. Do I really need to explain that he'd be executed immediately as a traitor and assassin? Does he not realize such a government-obsessed country would have a power structure in place? And how exactly does Voller believe he'll learn from Hitler's mistakes? Pray tell, Herr Voller. Please explain in detail your grand strategy to win the war. What does fixing Hitler's mistakes entail? Would he use future knowledge to know the secrets of the past and mess with it? Or to know the outcome of battles? Would he cancel the assault on Poland to give Germany more time to build resources? Would he tell the Japanese when the Pacific Fleet arrived at Pearl Harbor? Would he cut off the British and annihilate them at Dunkirk? Would he stop the Holocaust and use the manpower used to run the camps to fight instead? Would he tell Rommel how to avoid defeat at El Alamein? Would he better prepare Germany or just know how better react to the war? Voller never explains what he's going to do once he takes power, so I suppose he never planned that far ahead, just like the writers. Besides, he's hardly a military historian, so it's idiotic of him to think he could rule better than Hitler. Also, Hitler wasn't a military genius, but even if you take him out, his generals weren't much better. Just saying. Except Rommel. That Desert Fox nickname isn't for a persona, you know. He has it for a reason. All this doesn't even mention one of the little platoon's most condemning criticisms. If Voller is so bright, why would he not bring modern technology to the past? Voller could bring back designs and prototypes for the V-2 rocket, the AK-47 rifle, the integrated circuit, the Uzi SMG, the STG-44 rifle, duct tape, synthetic rubber, penicillin, satellites, supersonic aircraft, even LEDs. Any of these innovations we take for granted could have advanced the Nazi war effort and give them the edge. That's not even counting the big one that, as a physicist, Voller should absolutely prioritize: nuclear weapons. The writer should have driven home that by handing the Nazis 3 decades worth of atomic developments, they would hold all the cards, and the Allies would be powerless. This would instill fear in the audience, emphasizing Voller's depravity and commitment to the cause. Also, in the van, Voller puts on a wristwatch, which is the same one on Archimedes' body in the tomb. This opens a paradox because now 2 versions of the same watch exist simultaneously. The bad guys arrive at the airport, and Voller changes into a cheesy cosplay outfit. Helena and Teddy watch as Indy is put aboard a modified Heinkel 111 bomber. There's a missed opportunity to have Teddy identify the plane, allowing Helena to piece together Voller's plan independently. I also want to reiterate how, if Voller didn't know the second half of the dial would be in Sicily, how did he have a plane, costumes, and soldiers on standby? And once again, how was he able to afford this on a government salary? Note, upon seeing the plane, my friend realized that it was the Phoenix from the Freeze. Upon seeing this, he said the following: "Oh, it's the plane. Good God." Helena asks Teddy if he can fly a Nord plane nearby. Teddy says he doesn't know how to fly a plane of that model. Helena responds with, "You can't fly any plane." Ma'am, if you knew that he couldn't fly any plane, why would you ask him if he can fly a specific type of plane? Teddy hotwires the smaller plane while Helena pursues the departing plane. It's nighttime and rainy, which is meant to hide the CGI plane and CGI motorcycle. Even Phoebe Waller-Bridge admits this.
It's more visceral for the audience.
Then what were your favorite scenes to shoot?
Yeah, I loved the adrenaline of being on a stationary motorbike with rain lashing in my face in a studio with someone dressed in like a green alien suit taking my bike behind me. Never been happier.
You know, in the previous films, they filmed motorcycle chases with all practical effects. The campus chase with Mutt is still the best scene in Crystal Skull. I miss that movie. Voller tells a joke about fastening seat belts. Indy says, "You can't be funny, Voller. You're German."
That actually is pretty funny.
Helena follows the plane as it lifts off the runway and leaps onto the landing gear as it pulls up. It recalls the far superior stunt performed by Nathan Drake in Uncharted 3. Helena even copies Nathan Drake by stowing away in a non-existent vent shaft under the cargo hold like he did. Teddy, who has no training, manages to take off in a plane in the middle of a storm. There was a bare minimum of setup in the Moroccan hotel. Kleber sees the smaller plane, but does nothing about it. He doesn't even try to shoot it with a rear-mounted machine gun. It's a thunderstorm and the Heinkel 111 flies towards a mystical hole in the sky. Indy sees some boxes rattling around and rambles about continental drift. He asserts that since Archimedes didn't know about plate tectonics, the coordinates have moved and therefore his calculations were wrong and they are not traveling to 1939. This makes no sense to me because continental drift over such a geologically insignificant time gap is borderline negligible. Archimedes also might not have known about axial precession, which is problematic for a device dependent on the movement of celestial bodies. But that's above the writer's pay grades. At least Lara Croft knows it.
If it's really an 8 with precession, it...
What?
Precession. The Earth tilts, so over time these stars appear in a different place on the horizon. Important if you're navigating by the night sky.
Okay.
In the Maya calendar, that's a 2,000-year difference.
Indy laughs like a madman and is obviously senile. Mads Mikkelsen does some good acting where Voller gradually has doubts and starts freaking out, ordering the plane to turn around. But it's too late and both the Heinkel and Teddy's prop plane are sucked into the time portal. The time fissure for some reason causes the engines to stall and both planes lose altitude. At this point, a pilot named Luigi, emerges from the back of Teddy's plane out of nowhere and panics, but ultimately helps him stabilize the aircraft. The writers probably realized, wait, having a 10-year-old who has never flown a plane before regain altitude is ridiculous. Yeah, just throw in another character at the last minute to do it for him. Setups, am I right? The Heinkel stabilizes and Voller celebrates that he successfully traveled to Sicily in 39. Kleber tries to hug Voller, but he rejects him, which is sort of sad. He gloats to Indy that, "Yesterday belongs to us, Dr. Jones." I can't do the German accent, I'm sorry. A legitimately good line, or perhaps a bad one masked by Mikkelsen's acting skill. But I cannot take the line seriously because by now Voller's hat has fallen off, and his wispy gray hair and glasses make him look like Andy Warhol. Indy looks out the window to make a startling discovery. Roman triremes. Indy and Voller realize that they haven't traveled to 39 as planned, but to the siege of Syracuse at some period between 214 and 12 BC. There is no title card, so I don't know specifically when, but it's implied that this is the first Roman wave in 214 BC. Yes, first aliens, now time travel. What's next? A multiverse? Before we get into the Bat Guano insane climax, I'm going to bet that most of you likely know little about the Siege of Syracuse. I don't blame you, because the siege was a sideshow amid a larger conflict, rarely taught in history classes. Therefore, I'll give a thorough background about the period. in which the scene takes place, and then I will walk you through all the inaccuracies. I specifically read Polybius's was he Roman or Greek? Slips my mind. But I read Polybius's account of the siege, so I would understand what Archimedes did in real life. It's very interesting. You should give it a read. The writers didn't. Here we go. In the late 3rd century BC, or BCE for you secular readers out there, Rome was at war with a country called Carthage. Carthage was a naval empire based out of Tunisia in North Africa, founded by the ancient Phoenicians. Rome and Carthage, being the two superpowers of the Western Mediterranean, fought a series of conflicts known as the Punic Wars, which Rome ultimately won. The most famous of the wars is the Second Punic War, which you likely know because that war featured Hannibal, no relation to Mads Mikkelsen, the legendary military genius who led his force of elephants over the Alps. During the Second Punic War, Hannibal and the Carthaginians sought to isolate Rome from the other tribal nations in Italy and Sicily. Syracuse was a flourishing city-state that sided with Carthage. In 214 BC, Rome launched a naval siege against Syracuse under the commander Marcus Marcellus. Our two primary sources on the siege, the historians Polybius and Livy, recount how Rome expected to easily take the city but entered a protracted siege due to Archimedes. Archimedes was a Greek mathematician and inventor who studied at the Library of Alexandria and lived in Syracuse. He invented the hydrostatic principle, made several geometric contributions, and invented the Archimedes screw, a device for raising water. When the Romans laid siege to his hometown, he became the city's lead military engineer and architect. Polybius says that Archimedes single-handedly fending off the attackers shows, quote, that in certain circumstances, the genius of one man is more effective than any numbers whatever. Archimedes invented a series of brilliant weapons and contraptions, which the movie mentions in passing. The famous death rays built by reflecting sunlight via mirrors have no historical proof, but what did exist were cranes that could lift the prows of oncoming Roman ships, lift them into the air, and let go, causing the enemy ships to break up or capsize. He also built a variety of catapults that launched darts and rocks. Cranes dumped rocks on top of enemy vessels. When the Romans neared the walls, Archimedes had slits cut through them that allowed archers and crossbows called scorpions to shoot enemies. The inventions of Archimedes fended off the Romans, repelling the initial assault so effectively that, according to Dr. Eve MacDonald of Cardiff University, the Romans, quote, believed they were fighting a supernatural enemy. After 3 years in a protracted siege, the Romans snuck into the city after a festival that left the town too drunk to defend itself. Archimedes was killed by a Roman soldier despite orders to be captured, and all the city's treasures were looted and carted back to Rome. Okay, got it? Now, let's commence with the climax. Some of the actions I described might be slightly out of sequence, however, this is how it plays out. Here are the pieces at play. Voller, Kleber, the pilots, and Indy are in the cockpit of the Nazi plane. Behind them is a loading bay of Nazi soldiers armed with MP40s. Helena is in a rear vestibule. And a second plane trailing behind them contains Teddy and the Italian pilot Luigi. In the harbor is the Roman fleet, especially one Roman random soldier named Maximus. No relation to Gladiator. Inside Syracuse is Archimedes and his two assistants. The chessboard is set up. Let's resume. The Heinkel flies west above the fleet, unable to gain altitude for no reason. Maximus, the Roman soldier we know nothing about, sees the plane overhead, shouts that it's a dragon, and says they should open fire. The Romans direct their fire at the airplane, and they begin launching ballista bolts. This is absurd. A ship-mounted ballista is not an anti-aircraft weapon, and highly unlikely to strike a moving target hundreds of feet above it. That is as plausible as when you're playing a first-person shooter armed with a pistol, and you try shooting an overhead plane. Some crack shot fires a ballista bolt shaped like an oversized harpoon into the engine and another in the fuselage, inches from Indy. Boyd Holbrook has a frankly adorable expression of panic on his face when this happens, and he freaks out. Indy cuts his restraints on the edge of the harpoon. Kleber has the brilliant idea of antagonizing the people firing at them by opening the plane's side hatch and shooting at the Romans with a handgun. When Indy tries to stop him, Kleber shoves him down but doesn't consider shooting him even though Indy is free from his ropes. Indy sees Syracuse through the porthole, and we have one shot of Archimedes' CGI inventions. Claws launch from catapults, and the heat rays burn Roman sails. Voller starts chanting 99999, like he's reciting a very convenient phone number. Everything about this is so nonsensical and ridiculous, it feels like something from a bad Saturday morning cartoon. At this point, I'm convinced that even a furry fan fiction artist could write a more coherent script. Voller acts like I'm J-Station after summoning Michael Jackson at 3 a.m. It starts flailing, telling the pilots to go back to the portal. The airplane, for whatever reason, is not ascending and is still within striking range of the ancient weapons. Why aren't the pilots going up? Are they stupid? Or maybe these were the Death Star Destroyer pilots from Rise of Skywalker who can't tell up from down. Anyways, Voller is so upset he wrestles over the controls as if he knows how to fly a plane better. Is he stupid? Kleber keeps firing with the bandit, and another Nazi goon thinks this is a bright idea and joins them. Then another harpoon shoots up, impales him, and he flies out into the sky. This is unintentionally hilarious. The plane swoops down over what I presume is the island of Ortygia and curves north, nearly colliding with a chain of mountains that does not exist in real life. Meanwhile, in the city, Archimedes works in his lab, configuring an unfinished dial. An assistant comes in, mentions the dragons, and prompts Archimedes to leave on horseback. The plane appears to head east, turn around, and head west again into the line of fire. This whole time, there are about 6 soldiers in the back who just stand there as all this madness unfolds. Helena decides to make her move, pulling a conveniently placed lever to open the plane's bomb bay doors. No, I'm not talking about Mumbai. Dropping out all the Nazi soldiers except one who keeps holding on. She antagonizes him, so he grabs her leg and the two are left dangling out of the plane's belly. Why would Voller put soldiers in a hold with a collapsing floor when you could put them further up the fuselage where Indy is sitting? Is he stupid? Indy decides to do something useful. He picks up a Walther that was just lying there, shoots the guy off Helena's leg, and takes a parachute. Voller aims his gun at Indy and demands the parachute, but for some reason doesn't shoot him. Is he stupid? But Helena grabs the gun and in a rip-off of the Talbain fight from Uncharted 3, shoots Voller in the torso. It's a parallel of how Basil shot the Colonel in the prologue. Indy grabs Helena and they skydive out of the plane. Yes, if you watch the trailer about 6 months in advance, you have already seen the climactic stunt of the entire film. Helena and Indy fall out of the plane, which pans down to show them falling over Syracuse. They are at a higher altitude than they appear to be flying. If you watch the trailers at least as far back as March, you could clearly see this frame showing the ancient fortifications in the triremes, confirming the time travel rumors. Indeed, if you pause during one of the earliest trailers, you could foresee the movie's biggest twist. Voller just stands there dazed and confused. Kleber doubles down on antagonizing the people that think he's a monster by smashing the cockpit window, shoving an MG-34 machine gun through the glass nose, and wildly gunning down Romans while calling them savages, like that Pocahontas song. Also, why is Kleber the way he is? Is he a part of the crusty comedy classic? I don't know, whatever. Once again, I must reiterate how idiotic this is. Back on the beach, the Romans commit to an amphibious landing, and Maximus watches Roman soldiers be gunned down from above. The fact that Kleber kills dozens of soldiers who will never have descendants never affects the timeline in any capacity. At this point, one of the Syracusan catapults, not a Roman ballista, launches a flaming boulder that disables the other engine. You know, something like this happened in Rise of the Tomb Raider, where a catapult couldn't hit a helicopter because it was a moving target. You gotta need to learn something from Lara Croft. Voller and Kleber just stare as they crash into the ground. That's your big villain death, everyone. You know how in Raiders the villains get their heads shrunken, exploded, and melted by the pure wrath of God? Or Walter Donovan rapidly aging? Or Mola Ram's crocodile death roll? Or even Spalko's brain melting? Screw that, just give Voller the Buddy Holly treatment. The villain deaths in the preceding Indiana Jones movies followed two traditions. They were brutal and they were at the hands of the very artifacts they sought to control. The latter tradition emphasizing how seeking to gain power, as opposed to respecting these powerful objects, will backfire on men with evil hearts. The face-melting scene in Raiders exists not only for shock value, but to display how not believing and respecting God, for instance, dismissing it as a Jewish ritual, laughing at it, or assuming one is worthy of communicating directly with him, results in eternal damnation. Mola Ram is killed because he took the Shankara stones, relics given to humanity by the Hindu deity Shiva, and abused their abilities to seek personal power, commit religious genocide against the British, Muslims, Christians, and the entire world, and enslave innocents. This is what Indy means when he says Mola Ram betrayed Shiva. Walter Donovan is undone by his willingness to trust the duplicitous Elsa and his lack of recognizing the humility of Christ. He is unable to realize that the Holy Grail would not be encrusted with jewels or adorned with gold because Jesus was a carpenter and cared not for material wealth. Irina Spalko sought knowledge of an advanced civilization to control the world, and this greed caused her brain to literally overheat. She received exactly what she wanted, knowledge, and it was too much for her. All these villains, quote-unquote, get what they deserve. Dying instantly in a plane crash is far too easy, especially for a villain as cartoonishly malicious as Voller. Archimedes saunters over the wreckage, posing a question about the timeline I will acknowledge soon. He loots a wristwatch off of Voller's body, which looks like Freddy Krueger cosplaying as Prince Harry. He finds the finished dial and says, "Eureka," a famous quote by Archimedes that he likely never actually said. On the beach, the Roman soldier Maximus sees the distant parachute and wants to kill it. Teddy does the same and directs the pilot to land. Indy and Helena land on the ground, and the way they approach would have broken their legs. As someone who has personally tandem skydived, I distinctly recall my instructor saying that when reaching the ground, you should keep your feet outstretched, aloft, and let your buttocks hit the earth first. Anyways, the plot remembers that Indy was shot and he begins bleeding out once again. Indy watches the battle playing out and remarks how remarkable witnessing history is. It's funny because this dramatic battle scene was actually filmed at an abandoned tuna processing plant. Indy gazes out at Syracuse and all its saturated CGI glory. I feel like I'm playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey all over again. They both have the same degree of realism and historical accuracy. Indy gives Helena the coordinates to return and says they'll take her home, which makes no sense because the coordinates were shown to be useless, and you can already see the time portal from the ground. Indy says he wants to stay and witness history, but since he is bleeding, he will probably die. This is basically meant that Indy wants to off himself. since there's nothing for him in the future. Like, he has nothing to live for. Helena, who suddenly cares about Indy's well-being for whatever reason, says Indy will die without modern medicine. Indy replies that he's imagined and studied this all his life. No he hasn't. Indy was classically trained by Helen Seymour, sure, but he was never a class assist. His fascination with Archimedes and this battle was invented for this movie. Also, look at the saturated CGI background all around them. Remember, guys, we can trust James Mangold. This was definitely not a reshoot. Wink, wink. Teddy's plane lands outside the walls, and none of the Syracusans who thought it was a dragon decide to shoot the stationary, grounded target. Helena says that if he stays behind, Indy will mess up history. Madam, that ship has sailed. How will Indy disrupt history more than Voller already has? There is a wrecked plane on the ground. There is concrete evidence of the future interfering with history. The Syracusans now have a gigantic airplane in their custody. Do you have any idea what that would do to the timeline? The writers obviously didn't. A hulking airplane, one carrying bullets, metal, fabric, fuel, an engine, and machine guns is in their custody. It's not as if the plane crashed into the sea and vanished without trace. The wreckage is on land. This absolutely changes history. Archimedes, Syracuse, Rome, these were all engineering people with talents for adapting to new technologies. Do you have the slightest clue what will happen now that they probably have guns in their possession? And don't give me all that it was destroyed in the crash nonsense. Aside from burns, Kleber and Voller's bodies are intact, and the Antikythera device is completely undamaged. Kleber was using an MG-34 when the plane crashed. That is definitely now in Syracuse's possession, and that alone could turn the tide of the war, much less if they reverse engineer it in gunpowder. And what about the Walther PPKs and MP40s? Also, the swastika is prominent on the wreckage and uniforms, and it was already seen as a symbol across the ancient world, so wouldn't the swastika become even more emphasized in ancient art? And what about the future germs on the bodies? Wouldn't they cause an epidemic because the ancient people have no immunity to modern pathogens? And wouldn't the mere presence of humans in the past result in a butterfly effect? Even if I traveled to the past and didn't interact with anybody, the fact I was there at all would affect the future, introducing foreign microorganisms, affecting wind patterns. Any number of minute changes could have catastrophic consequences on the future. This is just like how the incompetent screenwriters who made Loki acted, as if time traveling to Pompeii would have no effect on the future, because the fact you time traveled there in the first place still causes a butterfly effect. Bodies, when excavated, will look differently to archaeologists, things like that. And now that there is wreckage and bodies on the ground in Syracuse, why does the puppet play display a folk tale about a dragon when it is clearly a vehicle? Why would the frieze made by Syracusan sculptors portray the plane as an animal when it is clearly a machine with people inside? And they would have the wreckage as visual reference. Why don't the chroniclers of the Punic Wars, Livy and Polybius, acknowledge these dragons in any of their records? Why doesn't Indy point out during his lecture that the Syracusans had dragons supporting them? Wouldn't the Romans and Syracusans have been stunned by the sound of a roaring engine since it was unlike anything they had heard before? They are accosted by Maximus, who attacks them before being shot with arrows by Archimedes' assistants. That's it? They showed the specific guy and just killed him? Was he supposed to be the soldier who killed Archimedes in real life? Because that would mess everything up. Archimedes approaches them, asking in ancient Greek how far they've come. I assume this is ancient Greek, but online I saw a claim that this was modern Greek, a completely different language. But that's irrelevant. Even though the film acted like Indy didn't know German and Arabic, it acknowledges that Indy speaks ancient Greek. Indy says they came from 2,000 years in the future. Archimedes replies by saying, "You were always going to meet me." This is the destiny element from the title, but it also implies that Indy was destined to come back to this time and interact with Archimedes. If you think about it, because of the time loop, Indy always made it back to 214 BC, setting the course of the future, which meant he was always going to live to 1969, which in turn means that throughout his entire life, he was never in any danger of dying because logically he had to survive to make it to this point in time and restart the cycle. None of his choices in any of the other movies mattered because regardless, they would result in him arriving here. Lovely. This kind of removal of free will due to time travel is exactly what ruined Loki, because in that universe, the TVA always ensured that the correct events occurred. The characters in the MCU never would have done anything differently because the events couldn't have happened any way differently. Helena says the dial was a force deck paying off the magic trick on the boat. The dial was rigged, and no matter what time was inputted, it was always going to take the user back to this time. This opens up another can of worms concerning the nature of time travel in the dial. But the gist is that Archimedes built the dial to trick people into returning to this battle to help him, which the Nazis did by scaring off the Romans. Wait a second. Indy and Helena were inconsequential to the climax of the film. If Voller had shot them both in Sicily, Voller still would have traveled through the time portal with the dial. He still would have arrived amid the battle. He still would have crashed and died. Wait until the Big Bang Theory gets a load of this. Helena interrupts Indy and begins talking to Archimedes. I would be annoyed with her randomly speaking ancient Greek as fluently as Indy, but I can give that a pass because she was the daughter of a classicist, and she was probably taught it. She says that she's a fan of his, which I suppose is a joke because the word and its meaning did not exist back then. She says Indy is hurt and they need to leave. Indy has wanted to speak to Archimedes, and now is his chance to ask whatever historical questions he desires, and Helena butts in the way. Indy says he wants to stay with Archimedes. Archimedes, to the actor's credit, lights up like a Christmas tree with excitement and is about to speak, but Helena interrupts them again. Let these two speak and quit sucking up all the oxygen. Helena starts crying, and this is her big letting down the facade moment. But for at least half the runtime, she acted antagonistic towards Indy. Why the development now? This is unearned. She left him to die earlier. Indy dons his fedora and says, I have to do this. The music swells. Indy has made his choice. He has nothing in the future, and now he has the chance to experience the history he spent his life protecting. When you think about it, it is extremely poetic and the perfect conclusion to Indy's story. Think of all the possibilities. Maybe he can recover from the gunshot and he can still learn from Archimedes. Maybe he can help Archimedes build the dial and hide the evidence of the plane so history isn't altered further. Then Indy could live the ultimate retirement, exploring the classical world till the end of his days. He could meet Hannibal and Scipio Africanus, witness the battle at Zama, and experience Carthage at the peak of its empire. He could even visit the Library of Alexandria and answer some of antiquity's greatest questions. Or better yet, they could do a Captain America an Endgame thing and have him come back when he's ready to share the history of the future. Or he could bring Archimedes back with him, faking his death, and allowing Archimedes to explore the technology of the future world, sort of like in Bill and Ted. Or you could have a scene where Helena and Teddy are walking through a museum and they see a relief sculpture of a man with a whip and a hat. Oh, this all sounds fascinating and fantastic. I can't wait to see what they...
I need to do this.
Me too.
No. What more is there to say? Indiana Jones, my hero, on his last adventure is robbed of his agency. He isn't the one to decide to the future. Indiana Jones, an archaeologist, doesn't know how he would affect the past and realizes he can't stay. Would it not be a pivotal moment for him to have the conflict where he knows he can't stay but is tempted? Why does Helena get to make that decision for him? Why does Indiana Jones' last movie end with him being knocked out? This definitely wasn't a reshoot, guys. They definitely weren't going to have Indy bleeding out looking at the vista, and when a focus group test went wrong, they decided to keep him alive. No, definitely not. Wink, wink. Why on earth would I want to see my childhood hero humiliated, borderline suicidal, begging to die, and the only thing he has is history? And that's taken from him too. Why does Helena say Indy can't mess up the past? Voller has already altered the past when you think about it. Why does Helena draw the line at Indy? Am I supposed to believe that Helena, of all people, is able to knock Indiana Jones unconscious? Indy took punches from the German mechanic and the thuggy guard? The latter smacked him in the head with a rock, and Indy soldiered on. Ursa Major even clocked Indy across the face, and Indy stayed awake. This is unconvincing, and it's even more absurd when you realize that Phoebe Waller-Bridge throws a punch far more convincingly in her own show.
She got her spotlight. What the fuck?
Also, how did Archimedes and his servants react to Helena punching Indy? Those guards had bows at the ready and were already apprehensive. What if, after Helena punched Indy, one of the servants is shocked by this act of violence, knocks an arrow, and sends one through Helena's eye socket? Also, what does the Italian pilot think of all this? Not only was he asleep 10 minutes ago, but he and Teddy have a language barrier, and now he is amid an ancient battle. What is going through his head? Whatever, who cares anymore? And he wakes up in his apartment in 1969 New York. We are supposed to believe that Helena punched Indy out so severely that, in that time, she dragged him to the plane. Archimedes and his assistants either helped or just stood and watched and let it happen. They piled him to a plane that looks like a two-seater. They took off, flew through the time portal, and returned to 1969 Sicily. They drove to a hospital. He underwent life-saving treatment. His unconscious body was hauled onto another plane. There was likely a layover in London or Rome, then a transatlantic flight. He is still unconscious when he lands in New York, where Helena and Teddy somehow know where his apartment is. He is taken to his apartment and is unconscious for several days. In that time, Helena contacts Marion and Ursula. Also, Indy is still wanted for murder, and this is never resolved. Call it overthinking, but you must admit the more you think about it, the less sense it makes. I know what you're thinking. How is this any different from Raiders, where Indy, Marion, and the Ark move from the Greek island to America? But if you think about it, it does make sense. Most of the Nazis on the island are dead. The submarine base likely contained a radio, which Indy could use to summon and signal the Bantu Wind or another friendly vessel to pick him and the Ark up. Whatever, there's no time to think about that. We have a definitely not tacked on or reshot ending here, guys. Indy wakes up, and beside his bed are the Antikythera device and a spearhead from ancient Syracuse. Either this symbolizes Helena not selling antiquities anymore, which is unearned, or maybe having Indy end up with an artifact unlike in the other films as a consolation prize. Also, what happened to the blood diamonds and the golden disc? We never see those again. Helena is in the living room. Indy says she should have left him in the past. Helena says he would have changed history, and Indy asks if that's a bad thing. If anyone on the planet should know the importance of not interfering with history, it should be him. Indy asks, who is he here to live for? I mean, for all we know, Oxley, Charles, Jack Shannon, Short Round. Oh, who else am I thinking about? Remy! Remy is still alive. All these people are still out and about as far as we know. Willie, too. Willie Scott, don't forget her. The Maharaja, he's around, and he's a good guy now. Whatever. By the way, they robbed us of not having one more scene with Short Round reuniting with Indy. They robbed us. And because they figured that Ke Huy Quan, he was still a nobody at the time, but if they wanted, they could have gotten him. And then when Ke Huy Quan won his Oscar with Everything Everywhere All at Once, great movie, even though I don't get a lot of it, he was back in the culture again, and Disney postured him and put him on display at the red carpet to nostalgia bait, even though they robbed us of seeing him again on screen.
The film is done. It's in the can. It comes out in mere months, and I must say we made the right call. Ke Huy Quan, he lacks the star power, I must say.
Mom, I just want an Oscar.
Marion walks in the room with Teddy. What's upsetting is that the makeup department uglified Karen Allen to make her look older than she is. Look at the red carpet footage. She looks great. Marion asks if Indy is back. This is perplexing. Indy isn't back because he never left. Remember, it was Marion who abandoned and divorced Indy. The script acts as if Indy was the one who initiated the divorce out of grief. Sallah shows up, talking to his kids about the plane fighting Raiders. Everybody leaves the apartment. Sallah sings Gilbert and Sullivan like he did in Raiders. Helena looks back and dons her hat, teasing us for the Helena spin-off series that, based on the box office returns, will never see the light of day. This Indy and Marion reconciling is supposed to be him coming back and his big win for the movie. But no, everything he had at the end of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was retroactively destroyed. If Indiana Jones's life was a progress bar, it started out at 100 at the end of Crystal Skull, depleted to like 10 after Mutt died, Marion abandoned him, and he lost his job, and it should be even lower now because one of his surviving friends, Ronaldo, is dead, so he's at 0. And now Marion is back, which brings him back to like a 20%. So yeah, this is not character development. Indy is worse off, and he still has a deficit of his life. His life is still worse off than it was at the end of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Whatever. Indy and Marion do a callback to the Does It Hurt scene on the Bond 2 win. The last shot is the clothesline outside Indy's apartment where the fedora hangs. There's a Looney Tunes style Irish shot before a hand snatches the hat and the screen fades to black. Is this suggesting that Indy is going to get intimate with his hat on? That's nasty. Then the credits roll and we see who's responsible for this hate crime of a movie. It's over. Well, it's not over because I have a lot more to go through, but this is as far as I can go for now. Well, that's the Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny in a nutshell. How do you feel? Apathetic, numb, frustrated, speechless? Perhaps Indiana Jones isn't your thing, and it's just a generic popcorn action movie. Perhaps you are so starved for a movie that you'll accept whatever you're given, like a beaten, starved junkyard dog that's given, I don't know, like a banana peel as food. I suspect for some of you, especially you guys on the Indiana Jones subreddit, the emotions have yet set in, and you are just dumbfounded or in denial. But don't worry, we have a lot to go, because I'm going to be talking about every aspect of this film on a technical level, offer rewrites, and talk about lots of things that could have been done better. It's going to be brutal, and if you think I'm rough on James Mangold and the other 3 chuckleheads, you've got another thing coming. Well, yeah, this is Dial of Destiny. I've been Dr. Talbain, and you guys are still in denial. I can't wait to see the faces on you guys when I come out with the other half of this.
It'd be funny if it weren't so pathetic. No, what the heck, I'll laugh anyway.